Hey everybody, welcome to Psychology with me. I'm Rashad, and today what we're going to be doing is beginning the book Exploring Social Psychology by David Myers and John Twenge. Again, social psychology is the class that I'm taking, and with Psychology with me, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking you guys along and sharing the things that I learned, because I believe that the best way to learn sometimes is to teach. So I'm just sharing it with you as I get it. So no better place to start than Module 1. Let's go. Module 1 is Doing Social Psychology. It's the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. And so basically in this first module, a lot of the things that you're going to see are kind of fundamental. So it's going to be things that are going to be tools and things that you can reach back on to help you kind of get a better grasp of what's going to be going on later on in the book. So one of the things you'll see is a fundamental word like theory. So one of the things about theory is an integrated set of principles that explain and predict observed events. Theory is an integrated set of principles that explain and predict observed events. Theory and how they talk about it in the book, they say that it's scientific shorthand is how they call it. They say it also often means less than a fact when people are referring to it in everyday conversation. Some people try to dismiss it as just a theory. However, evolution is a theory, but then also so is gravity. Gravity is treated as a fact, but the fact is that your keys fall to the ground when dropped. But gravity is the theoretical explanation that accounts for such observed facts. Now, to a scientist, and facts and theories are like apples and oranges. So to a scientist, facts are agreed upon statements about the things that we observe. And theories are ideas that summarize and explain the facts. So facts are agreed upon statements about what we observe, and theories are ideas that summarize and explain the facts. And not only summarize, but also imply testable predictions called hypotheses. I know back in the day when we talked about hypotheses in school, in grade school, 7th, 8th grade, whatever, we just labeled it as an educated guess. Here it goes a little bit deeper. So with a hypothesis is a testable proposition that describes a relationship that may exist between events. A hypothesis is a testable proposition that describes a relationship that may exist between events. So hypotheses are good because they serve several purposes, not one, but several. So the first is that they allow us to test a theory by suggesting how we might try to falsify it. The second is sometimes send investigators looking for things that they may have never considered otherwise. The third purpose that it serves is the predictive feature of good theories can also make them practical. Another thing that we went over in that chapter, in this module, you'll see is field research. Now, field research is defined as research done in a natural, real-life setting outside of the laboratory. Field research is research done in a natural, real-life setting outside of the laboratory. So, social psychological research can be done in a lab, which is a controlled situation, or field research, which is everyday situations. Field research varies by method, whether it's correlational or experimental. So field research varies by methods, whether it's correlational or whether it's experimental. If I get my graphics right now we're in the beginning, so don't ask for a lot, but when I get the graphics right, boom, I have the words. Anyway, so It also goes on in the book and notes something pretty interesting. If you want to be a critical reader of psychological research reported in the media, it helps to understand the difference between correlational and experimental research. Now, correlational research, the study of the naturally occurring relationships among variables. So, correlational research is the study of the naturally occurring relationships among variables. So, correlational research is asking whether two or more factors are naturally associated. Now, there's an advantage to it and there's a disadvantage to it. Now, the major advantage to it is that you can examine important variables in their natural settings. So this isn't the lab, so you can actually see how it responds in its natural habitat or natural environment. Now, with that comes the disadvantage. The disadvantage is the difficulty in determining cause and effect. Because there are so many different other variables around, it's hard to pinpoint down what exactly is causing the effect or the change that you're viewing, that you're observing. So we also go on to correlation and causation. Now, correlation and causation. An example of that would be like the wealth health questions which illustrates the most irresistible thinking error made by both amateur and professional social psychologists. So when two factors such as wealth and health go together, it's tempting to conclude that one causes the other. What they're trying to tell us here in this book is that there are different ways, there are different things even to consider within that. One is wealthy people are healthier. That's the obvious one. They get better treatment as far as hospital treatment and stuff like that. It's obvious. Another point is, another perspective is maybe healthier people are more likely to succeed. And then a third perspective is both healthy and wealthy people could be indicated by a totally different factor, whether that's religion, whether that's environment, whether that, something like that. So just trying to get us to understand that everything isn't all like it immediately seems. So correlations indicate relationship, but that relationship is not necessarily one of cause and effect. Correlation research also allows you to roughly predict one variable from another. Because remember, correlational relationships, this is underneath the umbrella of field research. So correlation relationships allow us to roughly predict one variable from another. But it can't tell us whether one variable, such as wealth, causes another, such as health. So it can't do that. And then we go on to the other type of research, which is experimental research. Now, experimental research is something we're more intuitively familiar with. But the definition goes, experimental research are studies that seek clues to cause and affect relationships by manipulating one or more factors, which are independent variables, we'll go over that, while controlling others, holding them constant. Experimental research are studies that seek clues to cause and affect relationships by manipulating one or more factors, independent variables, while controlling others, what we call holding them constant. And I hope me reading this over and stuff doesn't bother you. It helps me get it when I hear it over and over and over. So I'm hoping it helps you out too. So experimental research. So they say that what you do with that, you're constructing a simulated reality. Now, there are two major advantages that go along with that. One advantage is called random assignment, and the other advantage is called control. First, let's go to random assignment. Random assignment is defined as the process of assigning participants to the conditions of an experiment such that all persons have the same chance of being in a given condition. Random assignment is the process of assigning participants to the conditions of an experiment such that all persons have the same chance of being in a given condition. So it don't matter. Basically, you're going to have the same odds to be in any given portion of this experiment. Now, there's a quick note. It says, note the distinction between random assignment in experiments and random sampling in surveys. So those are two different things. So sometimes people are talking about random assignments, which is what we're talking about today. Then there's random sampling, which we're not talking about today. So random assignments helps us to infer cause and effect. Random sampling helps us generalize to a population, like when people take polls and stuff, just to kind of see what people think about certain topics or how they want to vote and et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, they get a better idea of what they feel the people overall are going to do. That's more of a sampling, a random sampling. What we're talking about today are random assignments, which is the process of assigning participants to the conditions of an experiment such that all persons have the same chance of being in a given condition. So they give a good example here in the book. They talk about an experiment that they conducted with kids. So it's basically kids watching TV, but not just any TV. They're watching violent TV. So TV shows with violence, I'll say that. And one of the things that is deduced is that kids watching more violent TV equals more kids that are more likely to behave aggressively later in life. Now, the problem with that, I mean, it sounds good, but it sounds like it makes sense. The problem with that is that it's a correlational finding. So it's not really, it's still up for a deeper examination as far as experimental research is concerned. But the problem is that it's difficult to prove if TV shows cause aggression. Let me actually read you where it was talking about this. All right, here we go. Let's go here. Let's start here. So, kids' violent TV shows. So it says a survey researcher might measure and statistically control for some of the third variables, and see if correlations survive. But one can never control for all the factors that might distinguish people who love violent TV shows and those who don't. So earlier, what it was talking about in the book is that you have different variables. Some people can be more aggressive just in nature, and they can watch more aggressive TV, be attracted more to aggressive TV. Just kind of showing the different types of variables and why it's difficult to kind of pinpoint down. Anyway, it says, but one can never control for all the factors that might distinguish people who love violent TV shows and those who don't. Maybe they differ in personality, intelligence, self-control, or dozens of ways the researcher has not considered. In one fell swoop, random assignment eliminates all such extraneous factors. For example, a researcher might randomly assign people to watch violent TV or non-violent TV shows, and then measure their aggressive behavior. With random assignment, each person has an equal chance of viewing violent TV or non-violent TV shows. Thus, the people in both groups, in every conceivable way, family status, intelligence, education, initial aggressiveness, hair color, average about the same. Highly aggressive people, for example, are equally likely to appear in both groups. Now, because random assignment creates equivalent groups, any latter difference in aggressive behavior between the two groups will almost surely have something to do with the only way they differ, whether or not they viewed violence. So in order to do that, they had to do what we're about to cover now, is gain control. So control is constructing social situations that stimulate important features of our daily lives. Control is constructing social situations that stimulate important features of our lives. So, reading on, it says social psychologists experiment by constructing social situations that stimulate important features of our daily lives. By varying just one or two factors, these one or two factors are called independent variables. By varying just one or two factors at a time, the experimenter pinpoints their influence. He or she can kind of hone in on it, on what's actually making the difference. So the experiment enables the social psychologist to discover principles of social thinking, social influence, and social relations. So now the book continues on with the violent TV experiment. This question using the experimental method, what they end up doing, researchers control the situation by having some children do one thing and other children not. For example, of how researchers manipulate variables through control, whether the children watch, in this example is Power Rangers, whether they watch the Power Rangers show was the independent variable in this experiment. Immediately after viewing the episode, the children who watched Power Rangers committed 7 times as many aggressive acts as those who did not. Okay. The observed aggressive acts were the dependent variable, the outcome being measured in the study. So the dependent variable is the outcome that's being measured. The observed aggressive acts were the dependent variable, which is the outcome being measured in this study. Such experiments indicate that television can be one cause of children's behavior. Now, the official definitions of independent variable and dependent variable are as follows. The independent variable is the experimental factor that a researcher manipulates. It's the thing that they tweak. It's the thing that they control to a certain extent. The dependent variable is the variable being measured, so called because it may depend on manipulations of the independent variable. Again, so the dependent variable is the variable being measured. It's so called a dependent variable because it may depend on manipulations of the independent variable. And so we also want to go over what we call replication. Replication is important because replication equals confirmation, is how the book puts it. The ability for something to be replicated means that this is the verification that it is true. So let's go over replication. The definition: replication is repeating a research study, often with different participants in different settings, to determine whether a finding could be reproduced. Replication is repeating a research study, often with different participants in different settings, to determine whether a finding could be reproduced. And so that's the value. You can easily start to see the value of replication. Now, we close out this module talking about the ethics of experimentation. The ethics of experimentation. And one of the things about the ethics is that social psychologists would not, over long periods of time, expose children to violence, but rather briefly alter people's social experience and note the effects. So the ethic of it is that they're going to put you under the stress or this emotion of this experiment, But the ethical part of it is that it's not going to be over a long period of time, just enough time for them to take note of what it is of the changes that are happening. Sometimes people give their knowing consent. Occasionally, though, researchers find themselves operating in somewhat of a gray area. And that gray area is between harmless and risky. The risky being intense thoughts and intense emotions. So some of these experiments that you'll see is that they'll put people through kind of intense emotional and mental strain and stress and situations as part of the experiment. But this is the gray area of how much do you push to try to get the information that you need from the experiment? How much do you prod and push to see if without crossing certain thresholds? What they're going to want you to get into next is understanding mundane realism. Mundane realism is the degree to which an experiment is superficially similar to everyday situations. Mundane realism is the degree to which an experiment is superficially similar to everyday situations. It's good to note that experiments do not need to have mundane realism. I almost messed that up when I was studying it. Experiments do not need to have mundane realism. Experiments should have experimental realism. They do not need mundane realism, and mundane realism is the degree to which an experiment is superficially similar to everyday situations. But experiments should have experimental realism. Experimental realism is defined as the degree to which an experiment absorbs and involves its participants. Experimental realism is the degree to which an experiment absorbs and involves its participants. Experimental realism, it should engage the participants. An example is delivering electric shocks. You probably heard of that one. Delivering electric shocks as part of an experiment on aggression, forcing people to choose whether to give an intense or mild electric shock as part of an experiment on aggression. It functionally stimulates real aggression. Achieving experimental realism sometimes requires deceiving people with a plausible cover story. And again, under the idea of ethics, that is that gray area that we referred to earlier. Now, with that, it is also noted in here about the definition of informed consent and how important that can be. And it's informed consent is an ethical principle requiring that research participants be told enough to enable them to choose whether they wish to participate. Informed consent is an ethical principle requiring that research participants be told enough. It's a real gray area to enable them to choose whether they wish to participate. And I think the bottom line to that is that you can actually be in a situation where you can tell them too much. If you tell them too much, it can compromise the true effects of the experiment. It can compromise what it is that you're trying to really look for. So I do see a reason for the gray area. I also see a reason for me to stop talking. All right, family, look, thank you guys for tuning in to Psychology with me. I hope you got something out of it. If you didn't, try to watch it again. And if not, I'll watch it for myself. It's all good. But thank you guys. I'm Rashad, and I'll see you on the next one.